Hello. If you found yourself here today, listening to the sounds of my voice, that means I am about to read to you Aztec by Jennings. But before we get into that, I'll tell you a little bit about why I'm here. I read this book, Aztec, a couple years ago, and I loved it. And more recently, I started reading a couple of his other books. And it seems to me that Jennings is way less popular than he should be. There's only one audiobook that I could find anywhere, and that's for a pretty small book. Like, the rest of his really good books are like 900 pages, and the one audiobook I could find was for like a 200-page book. So, not very impressive. So, here I am, illegally, without permission, to give you this story, because the laws are not going to stand in my way of spreading the Gary Jennings love. People need to know about it. So this isn't, if you couldn't tell already, this is not going to be a very professional audiobook. Once I get into it, I'm going to get into it. But there may be times where I break character and laugh at something that happens. There may be times where I'm like, damn. And later on in the book, if we do not get taken down, there will be times where I'll stop and say, I'll dab to that. Take a little hit on the dab pen. And maybe you can too if you're so inclined. Currently the dab pen I have now is, it keeps clogging on the first hit. So I probably shouldn't do that right now, but once I get a new one, we're going to be able to start dabbing, getting high, bro. Another disclaimer, if you're going to come along with me on this journey, you better buckle up, because some crazy shit is about to go down in this book, if we are allowed to get far enough. There will also be some Aztec words that I will not pronounce correctly. I know that the X is pronounced like ch, so I'll do that a lot for you. I'll be saying a lot of words like that. So, with that, we shall begin Aztec by Gary Jennings. You're also going to be hearing a lot of page flipping, because I'm just sitting in my room in my underwear, reading this book to you. So, pause the podcast here if you need to. Get comfortable. Grab yourself, a little snack. Don't get too comfortable, because as I said, there's gonna be some crazy shit going on. And with that, Aztec. This book is dedicated to Zayanya. And we have a quotation here. You tell me then that I must perish, like the flowers that I cherish, nothing remaining of my name, nothing remembered of my fame. But the gardens I planted still are young, the songs I sang will still be sung. Quixote, Prince of Texcoco, ca. 1484. On the next page here we have a map of the central plaza of the Aztec city of Tenochtitlan, which obviously cannot, you can't see the map, so we're just going to skip that page. And now we have a letter from the Emperor Don Carlos. The Aztec Empire has just been taken over by the Spaniards, and the Emperor Don Carlos has sent to His Majesty's legate and chaplain, Fray Don Juan de Zumarraga, lately appointed Bishop of the Sea of Mexico in New Spain, a charge upon him, that we may be better acquainted with our colony of New Spain, of its peculiarities, its riches, the people who possessed it, and the beliefs, rites, and ceremonies which they heretofore held, We wish to be informed of all matters appertaining to the Indians during their existence in that land, before the coming of our liberating forces, ambassadors, evangelists, and colonizers. Therefore, we order that you shall inform yourself from ancient Indians, having first administered to them the oath to assure veracity, as to their country's history, their governments, their traditions, their customs, etc. In addition to the information that you secure from witnesses, you will cause to be brought before you any writings, tablets, or other records of that foregone time, which may substantiate what is said. And you will cause your missionary friars to search and ask for such records among the Indians. Because this is a very weighty matter, and very necessary for the discharge of His Majesty's conscience, we command you to attend to the conduct of the said inquiry with all possible promptitude, care, and diligence, and that your account be set forth in much detail. Signed Carolus R.I., Rex et Imperator, Hispaniae Carolus Primus, Sacri Romani Imperii Carolus Quintus. And here we have the response letter from Fray Don Juan de Zumaraga, lately appointed Bishop of the See of Mexico. Sanctified Caesarian Catholic Majesty, the Emperor Don Carlos, our Lord King. May the grace, peace, and loving kindness of our Lord Jesus Christ be with your Majesty Don Carlos, by divine mercy eternally august Emperor, and with your esteemed Queen Mother Dona Juana, together with your Majesty by the grace of God, rulers of Castile, of Leon, of Aragon, of the two Sicilies, of Jerusalem, of Navarre, of Granada, of Toledo, of Valencia, of Galicia, of Mallorca, of Seville, of Sardinia, of Cordova, of Corsica, of Murcia, of Jaen, of the Caribbees, of Algeciras, of Gibraltar, of the Canary Isles, of the Indies, of the islands and lands of the ocean sea, Counts of Flanders and of the Tyrol, etc. Very fortunate and most excellent Prince, from this city of Tenochtitlan, Mexico, capital of your dominion of New Spain, this 12th day after the Assumption, in the year of our Lord 1529, greeting. It was but 18 months ago, your Majesty, when we, though the least of your vassal subjects, heeded your Majesty's command that we assume this trifled post as the first appointed Bishop of Mexico, protector of the Indians, and apostolic inquisitor, all embodied in our one and own poor person. It has been but 9 months since our arrival in this new world, and there was much arduous work awaiting us. In accordance with the mandate of this appointment, we have striven zealously to instruct the Indians in their duty to hold and worship one true God, who is in heaven, by whom all creatures live and are maintained, and likewise to acquaint the Indians of that most invincible and Catholic Majesty, the Emperor Don Carlos, who in divine providence has willed that the whole world should obey and serve. Inculcating these lessons, sire, has been far from easy or expeditious. There is a saying among our fellow Spaniards here, extant well before our arrival. The Indians cannot hear except through their buttocks. But we try to bear in mind that these miserable and spiritually impoverished Indians, or Aztecs, as most Spaniards now refer to this particular tribe or nation of them hereabouts, are inferior to all the rest of mankind, and therefore, in their insignificance, deserve our tolerant indulgence. Besides attending to the Indians' instruction, that there is only one God in heaven, and the Emperor on earth, whose subjects they have all become, and whom they must serve, and besides dealing with many other ecclesiastical and civil matters, we have attempted to comply with your Majesty's personal adjuration to us, that we early prepare an account of the conditions of this terra pena incognita, the manners and ways of life of its inhabitants, the customs, etc., formerly obtaining in this benighted land. Your most lofty Majesty's royal cedula specifies that we, in providing the chronicle, shall inform ourselves from ancient Indians. This has necessitated something of a search, inasmuch as the total destruction of this city by Captain General Hernan Cortez left us very few ancient Indians from whom to seek a credible oral history. Even the workers currently rebuilding the city consist mainly of women, children, the don'ts and dotards who are unfit to fight in the siege, brute peasants conscripted from the outlying lands, oafs, all of them. Nevertheless, we were able to ferret out one ancient Indian, of some 63 years of age, capable of providing the desired account. This Mexicatl, he repudiates both the appellations Aztec and Indian, is of a high grade of intelligence for his race, is articulate, is possessed of what education was heretofore afforded in these parts, and has been in his time a scrivener of what passes for writing among these people. In his lifetime he has had numerous occupations besides that of scribe, as warrior, as courtier, as travelling merchant, even as a sort of emissary from the late rulers of this place to the first arriving Castilian liberators, and those envoy duties have given him a passable grasp of our language. Though his Castilian falters seldom, we of course desire precision in all details. So we have provided an interpreter, a young lad who has considerable proficiency in Nahuatl, which is what these Aztecs call their guttural language of lengthy and unlovely words. In the interrogation room, we have also seated 4 of our own scribes. These friars are adept in that art of swift writing by character, known as Tyronian notes, which is employed at Rome for making memoranda of the Holy Father's every utterance, and even for recording the entire proceedings of many peopled conferences. We bade the Aztec sit down and tell us his life story. The 4 friars, busily flicking away at their Tyronian squiggles, did not then or since lose a single word that drops from the Indian's lips. Drops. Better say, words that cascade in torrents, alternately loathly and corrosive. You will soon see what we mean, sire. From the very first opening of his mouth, the Aztec evinces disrespect for our person, our cloth, and our office as our revered Majesty's personally chosen missionary, which disrespect is an implicit insult to our sovereign himself. The first pages of the Indian's narrative follow immediately after this explanatory introduction. Sealed for your eyes only, sire, this package of manuscript will depart Tizuatlan de la Vera Cruz the day after tomorrow, in the keeping of Captain Sanchez Santavena, master of the Caravel Gloria. Your Caesarian Majesty's wisdom, sagacity, and discrimination being universally known, we realize that we risk your imperial displeasure in presuming to preface the enclosed pages with a caveat. But in our episcopal and apostolic capacity, we feel that obligatory upon us. We are sincerely desirous of complying with your Majesty's cedula, of sending a true report of all there is worth knowing of this land. But others besides ourselves will tell your Majesty that the Indians are paltry beings, in whom one will scarcely find even vestiges of humanity, who do not even have a comprehensible written language, who have never had any written laws, but only barbaric customs and traditions, who have been, or still are, addicted to all kinds of intemperance, paganism, ferocity, and carnal lusts, who have but lately tortured and slain their own fellow beings for the sake of their misbegotten religion. We cannot believe that a worthwhile or edifying report could be procured from an informant like this arrogant Aztec, or from any other native, however articulate. Also, we cannot believe that our sanctified Emperor Don Carlos can be other than scandalized by the iniquitous, salacious, and impious prattlings of this overweening specimen of a dunghill race. We have referred to the enclosure herewith as the first part of the Indian's Chronicle. We fervently desire and trust that it will also, by your Majesty's command, be the last. May God our Lord guard and preserve the precious life, the very royal person, and the very Catholic estate of your Majesty for uncounted years, with the enlargement of your reigns and dominions as your royal heart desires. Of your CCCM, the ever-faithful servant and chaplain, Esse Signum, Friar Juan de Zumarraga, Bishop of Mexico, Apostolic Inquisitor, Protector of the Indians. Well, if anyone is still here with me, hello, I'm glad to have you. My goal is to get at least 3 people very invested in this story. And I think it would help me do that if I slowed down a little bit. I was reading a little fast for those letters, and I think I might get a little less tripped up if I did not do that. So with that, we have some opening credits here for the book before we get into the Aztec story. The chronicle told by an elderly male Indian of the tribe commonly called Aztec, which narrative is addressed to His Excellency, the Most Reverend Juan de Zumarraga, Bishop of Mexico, and recorded verbatim ab origine by Friar Gaspar de Guiana J., Friar Toribio Vega de Aranjuez, Friar Geronimo Munoz G., Friar Domingo Villegas e Ibarra, and Alonso de Molinda, interpreters. If we could, let's get a quick round of applause for our scribes and our interpreter. Not a big fan of the Reverend Juan. The Spaniards are not very fun guys in this book. I mean, I'm sure they're a lot better nowadays, but the scribes, though, the scribes are cool. If I had my dab pen, I would dab to that. Anyway, the first part of the Aztec story. My lord, pardon me, my lord, that I do not know your formal and fitting honorific, but I trust I do not hazard my lord's taking offense. You are a man, and not one man of all the men I have met in my life has ever resented being addressed as a lord. So, my lord, your excellency, is it? Ayo, even more illustrious, what we of these lands would call an aguaquajito, a tree of great shade. Your excellency it shall be then. It impresses me the more that a personage of such eminent excellency should have summoned such a one as myself to speak words in your excellency's presence. Ah no, your excellency, do not demur if I appear to flatter your excellency. Common report throughout the city, and these your servitors here, have made plain to me how august a man you are. Your excellency, well, I am but a threadbare rag, a frayed raveling of what once was. Your excellency is attired and arrayed and assured in your conspicuous excellency, and I am only I. But your excellency wishes to hear of what I was. This has also been explained to me. Your excellency desires to learn what my people, this land, our lives were like in the sheaves of years before it pleased your excellency's king and his cross-bearers and crossbow-men to deliver us from our bondage of barbarism. That is correct. Then your excellency asks no easy thing of me. How, in this little room, out of my little intellect, in the little time the gods, the Lord God, may have vouchsafed me to finish my roads and my days, how can I evoke the vastness of what was our world, the variety of its peoples, the events of the sheaves upon sheaves of years? Think, imagine, picture yourself, your excellency, as that tree of great shade. See in your mind its immensity, its mighty boughs and the birds among them, the lush foliage, the sunlight upon it, the coolness it casts upon a house, a family, the girl and boy who are my sister and myself. Could your excellency compress that tree of great shade back into the acorn which your excellency's father once thrust between your mother's legs? Yeah. I have displeased your excellency and dismayed your scribes. Forgive me, your excellency. I should have guessed that the white men's private copulation with their white women must be different, of more delicacy, than I have seen them perform forcibly upon our women in public. and assuredly the Christian copulation that produced your Excellency must have been even more. Yes, your Excellency, I'd assist. But your Excellency perceives my difficulty. How to enable your Excellency to see at a glance the difference between our inferior then and your superior now? Perhaps one summary illustration will suffice, and you need trouble yourself with no more listening. Look, your Excellency, at your scribes, in our language, the word-knowers. I've been a scribe myself, and I will recall how hard it was to render onto fawnskin or fiber paper or bark paper so much as the unfleshed bones of historical dates and happenings, with any degree of accuracy. Sometimes it was hard even for me to read my own pictures aloud, without stumbling, after just the few moments the colors took to dry. But your word-knowers and I have been practicing while awaiting your Excellency's arrival, and I am amazed, I am struck with wonder at what any one of your reverend scribes can do. He can write and read back to me not just the substance of what I speak, but every single word, and with all the intonations and pauses and stresses of my speech. I would think it a talent of memory and mimicry. We had our word rememberers too. But he tells me, shows me, proves to me, that it is all there on his page of paper. I congratulate myself, your Excellency, that I have learned to speak your language with what proficiency my poor brain and tongue can attain, but your writing would be beyond me. In our picture writing, the very colors spoke. The colors sang or wept. The colors were necessary. They were many: magenta red, ochre gold, avocado green, turquoise blue, chocolatl, the red yellow of the jacinth gem, clay gray, midnight black. And even then they were inadequate to catch every individual word, not to mention nuances and adroit turns of phrase. Yet any one of your word-knowers can do just that, record every syllable forever, with a single quill instead of a handful of reeds and brushes, and, most marvelous, with just one color, the rusty black decoction they tell me is ink. Very well, your Excellency, there you have it in an acorn. The difference between us Indians and you white men, between our ignorance and your knowledge, between our old times and your new day. Will it satisfy your Excellency that the mere stroke of a quill has demonstrated your people's right to rule, and our people's fate to be ruled? Surely this is all that your Excellency requires from us Indians, a confirmation that the victor's conquest is ordained, not by his arms and artifice, not even by his almighty God, but by his innate superiority of nature over lesser beings like ourselves. Your Excellency can have no further need of me, or words of mine. My wife is old and infirm and unattended. I cannot pretend that she grieves at my absence from her side, but it annoys her. Alien and irascible as she is, her annoyance is not good for her, nor for me. Therefore, with sincere thanks to your Excellency for your Excellency's gracious reception of this aged wretch, I bid you my apologies, your Excellency. As you remark, I have not your Excellency's permission to depart at whim. I am at your Excellency's service for as long as... Again, my apologies. I was not aware that I had repeated your Excellency more than 30 times in this brief colloquy, nor that I had said it in any special tone of voice. But I cannot contradict your scribe's scrupulous account. Henceforth I will endeavor to temper my reverence and enthusiasm for your honorific, Senor Bishop, and to keep my tone of voice irreproachable. And, as you command, I will continue. But now, what am I to say? What should I cause your ears to hear? My life has been long, as ours is measured. I did not die in infancy, as so many of our children do. I did not die in battle or in holy sacrifice, as so many have willingly done. I did not succumb to an excess of drinking, or to the attack of a wild beast, or to the creeping decay of the being eaten by the gods. I did not die by contracting one of the dread diseases that came with your ships, and of which so many thousands upon thousands have perished. I have outlived even the gods, who forever had been deathless, and who forever would be immortal. I have survived for more than a full sheaf of years, to see and do and learn and remember much. But no man can know everything of even his own time, and this land's life began immeasurably long ages before my own. It is only of my own that I can speak, only my own that I can bring back to shadow life and your rusty black ink. There was a splendor of spears, a splendor of spears. An old man of our island of Shantaken used always to begin his battle tales that way. We listeners were captivated on the instant, and we remained engrossed, though it might have been a most minor battle he described, and, once he had told the foregoing events and the outcome of it all, perhaps a very trivial tale, hardly worth the telling. But he had the knack for blurting at once the most compelling highlight of a narrative, and then weaving backward and forward from it. Unlike him, I can but begin at the beginning and move onward through time just as I lived it. What I now state and affirm did all occur. I only narrate what happened, without invention and without falsehood. I kiss the earth. That is to say, I swear to this. I will make a little side note here. This is a historical fiction book. Just saying. But the amount of research that Gary Jennings puts into his books is insane. I know he lived in Mexico for like a long time when he was writing this book, and that's what like inspired him to write it. And we'll get into the other books when we get there, if we get there. But if Gary Jennings is spitting in some Aztec facts, you know he did his homework. But there will be some fictitious events. Okieneka, as you would say, once upon a time. Ours was a land where nothing moved more rapidly than our swift messengers could run, except when the gods moved, and there was no noise louder than our far-callers could shout, except when the gods spoke. On the day we called 7 Flower, in the month of God Ascending, in the year 13 Rabbit, the rain god Tlaloc was speaking his loudest, in a resounding thunderstorm. That was somewhat unusual, since the rainy season should have been then at its end. The Tlaloque's spirits which attend upon the god Tlaloc were striking blows with their forked sticks of lightning, cracking open the great casks of the clouds, so that they shattered with roars and rumblings, and spilt their violent downpour of rain. In the afternoon of that day, in the tumult of that storm, in a little house on the island of Shantaken, I came forth from my mother, and began my dying. To make your chronicle clearer, you see, I took pains to learn your calendar too. I have calculated that my day of birth would have been the 20th day of your month called September, and your year numbered 1466. That was during the reign of Moctezuma Ilukamina, meaning the wrathful lord, he who shoots arrows into the sky. He was our Uwe Tlatoani, or revered speaker, our title for what you would call your king or emperor. But the name of Moctezuma, or of anybody else, did not mean much to me at the time. At the time, warm from the womb, I was doubtless more impressed by being immediately plunged into a jar of breathtaking cold water. No midwife has ever bothered to explain to me the reason for that practice, but I assume it is done on the theory that if the newborn can survive that appalling shock, it can survive all the ailments which may beset it during its infancy. Anyway, I probably complained most vociferously while the midwife was swaddling me, while my mother was disentangling her hands from the knotted roof-hung rope she had clutched as she knelt to extrude me onto the floor, and while my father was carefully wrapping my severed navel string around a little wooden war-shield he had carved. That token my father would give to the first Mexicano warrior he chanced to encounter, and the soldier would be entrusted to plant the object somewhere on the next battlefield to which he was ordered. Thereafter, my Tenali, fate, fortune, destiny, whatever you care to call it, should have been forever urging me to go for a soldier, that most honorable of occupations for our class of people, and to fall in battle, that most honorable of deaths for such as we were. I say should have been, because, although my Tenali has frequently beckoned or prodded me in some odd directions, even in the combat, I have never really yearned either to fight or to die by violence before my time. I might mention that, according to the custom for female babies, the navel string of my sister Nine Reed had been planted, not quite 2 years earlier, beneath the hearth in that room where we both were born. Her buried string was wrapped around a tiny clay spindle wheel. Thus she would grow up to be a good, hard-working, and humdrum housewife. She did not. Nine Reed's Tenali was as wayward as my own. After my immersion in swaddling, the midwife spoke most solemnly and directly to me. If I was letting her be heard at all, I scarcely need remark that I do not repeat from memory any of those doings at my birth time. But I know all the procedures. What the midwife said to me that afternoon, I have since heard spoken to many a new boy baby, as it always was to all our male children. It was one of many rituals remembered and never neglected since time before time, the long-dead ancestors handing on, through the living, their wisdom to the newborn. The midwife addressed me as Seven Flower. That day of birth name I would bear until I had outlived the hazards of infancy, until I was 7 years old, by which age I could be presumed likely to live to grow up, and so would be given a more distinctive adult name. She said, "Seven Flower, my very loved and tenderly delivered child, here is the word that was long ago given us by the gods. You were merely born to this mother and this father to be a warrior and a servant of the gods. This place where you have just now been born is not your true home." And she said, "Seven Flower, you are promised to the field of battle. Your foremost duty is to give to the sun the blood of your enemies to drink, and to feed the earth with the cadavers of your opponents. If your Tenali is strong, you will be with us and in this place only a brief while. Your real home will be in the land of our sun god, Tonatiuh." And she said, "Seven Flower, if you grow up to die as a Shokimichwi, one of those sufficiently fortunate to merit the flowery death, in war or by sacrifice, you will live again in the eternally happy Tonatiuh, the afterworld of the sun, and you will serve Tonatiuh forever and forever, and you will rejoice in his service." I see you wince, Your Excellency. So should I have done, had I then comprehended that woeful welcome to this world, or the words spoken by our neighbors and kinsmen who crowded in to view the newcomer, each of them leaning over me with the traditional greeting, "You have come to suffer, suffer and endure." If children were born able to understand such a salutation, they would all squirm back into the womb, dwindle back into the seed. No doubt we did come into this world to suffer, to endure. What human being ever did not? But the midwife's words about soldiering and sacrifice were a mere mockingbird repetition. I have heard many other such edifying harangues, from my father, from my teachers, from our priests, and yours, all mindlessly echoing what they themselves had heard from generations long gone before. Myself, I have come to believe that the long dead were no wiser than we, even when they were alive, and their being dead has added no luster to their wisdom. The pontifical words of the dead I have always taken, as we say, "Ika mapel shoko," with my little finger, with a grain of salt, as your saying goes. We grow up and look down. We grow old and look back. Ayo, but what it was to be a child, to have the roads and the days all stretching out forward and upward and away, not one of them yet missed or wasted or repented. Everything in the world a newness and a novelty, as it once was to Omatikutli and Omakiato, our Lord and Lady pair, the first beings of all creation. Without effort, I remember. I recall to memory. I hear again in my age-muffled ears the sounds of dawn on our island Chantacan. Sometimes I awoke to the call of the early bird, Papan, crying his four-note papakiki, papakiki, bidding the world, arise, sing, dance, be happy. Other times I awoke to the even earlier morning sound of my mother grinding maize on the metlatl stone, or slapping and shaping the maize dough she would bake into the big, thin discs of tlaxcala bread, what you now call tortillas. There were even mornings when I awoke earlier than all but the priests of the San Tonatio. Lying in the darkness, I could hear them, at the temple atop our island's modest pyramid, blowing the hoarse bleats of the conch trumpet, as they burned incense and ritually run the neck of a quail, because that bird is speckled like a starry night, and chanted to the god, "See, thus the night dies. Come now and perform your kindly labors, O jeweled one, O soaring eagle. Come now to lighten and warm the one world." Without effort, without striving, I remember the hot middays when Tonatiuh the sun, in all the vigor of his prime, fiercely brandished his flaming spears, while he stood and stamped upon the rooftop of the universe. In that shadowless blue and gold noontime, the mountains around Lake Chantacan seemed close enough to touch. In fact, that may be my earliest memory. I could not have been much over 2 years old, and I had yet no conception of distance, for the day and the world were panting all about me, and I wanted the touch of something cool. I still recall my childish surprise when I stretched out my arm and could not feel the blue of the forested mountain that loomed so clear and close before me. Without effort, I remember also the day's endings, when Tonatiuh drew about him his sleeping mantle of brilliant feathers, and let himself down onto his soft bed of many-colored flower petals, and sank to sleep in them. He was gone from our sight to the dark place, Mictlan. Of the 4 afterworlds in which our dead might dwell, Mictlan was the nethermost, the abode of the utterly and irredeemably dead, the place where nothing happens, or has ever happened, or ever will. It was compassionate of Tonatiuh that for a time, a little time only, compared to what he lavished on us, he would lend his light, a little light only, dimmed by his sleeping, to the dark place of the hopelessly dead. Meanwhile, in the one world, on Chantacan anyway, the only world I knew, the pale blue mists rose from the lake so that the blackening mountains round about appeared to float on them, between the red waters and the purple sky. Then, just above the horizon, where Tonatiuh had disappeared, there flared for a while Omechochitl, the evening star after blossom. That star came, after blossom always came. She came to assure us that, though the night did darken, we need not fear this night's darken into the oblivion darkness of the dark place. The one world lived, and would live yet for a while. Without effort I remember the nights, and one night in particular. Metzli the moon had finished his monthly meal of stars, and he was full fed. He was gorged to his roundest and brightest, so that the figure of the rabbit in the moon was as clearly incised as any temple carving. That night, I suppose I was 3 or 4 years old, my father carried me on his shoulders, his hands holding tight to my ankles. His long strides bore me through cool brightness and cooler darkness. The dappled moonlight and moonshade beneath the spreading limbs and feathery leaves of the oldest of old trees, the Ahuehuetque cypresses. Excuse me. Cool tree. I was old enough then to have heard of the terrible things that lurked in the night-time, just beyond the edge of a person's vision. There was Choquequatl, the weeping woman, the first of all mothers to die in childbirth, forever wondering, forever bewailing her lost baby and her own lost life. There were the nameless, headless, limbless torsos that somehow managed to moan as they writhed blind and helpless on the ground. There were the disembodied, fleshless skulls that drifted head-high through the air, chasing travelers overtaken by night upon their travels. If a mortal glimpsed any of those things, he knew it to be a sure omen of dire misfortune. Some other denizens of the dark were not so utterly to be feared. There was, for instance, the god Yuwali Ehekatl, Night Wind, who gusted along the night roads, seeking to seize any incautious human abroad in the dark. But Night Wind was as capricious as any wind. Sometimes he seized, then let a person go free, and if that happened, the person would also be granted his heart's desire and a long life in which to enjoy it. So, in hope of keeping the god always in that indulgent mood, our people had long ago built stone benches at various of the island's crossroads, whereon Night Wind might rest in his rushings about. As I say, I was old enough to know and dread the spirits of the darkness. But that night, set on my father's broad shoulders, myself temporarily taller than a man, my hair brushed by the rustling cypress fronds, my face caressed by the dapples of moonlight, I felt not at all afraid. Without effort, I remember that night, because, for the first time, I was being allowed to observe a ceremony involving human sacrifice. It was but a minor rite, for it was an homage to a very minor deity, Atlawa, the god of fowlers. In those days, Lake Shaltakan teemed with ducks and geese, which, in their seasons of wandering, paused there to rest and to feed us. So, on that night of the well-fed moon, at the start of the season of the waterfowl, just one Xochimilco, one man only, would be ritually killed to the greater glory of the god Atlawa. And the man was not for a change a war captive, going to his flowery death with exhilaration or resignation, but a volunteer, going rather ruefully. "I am already dead," he had told the priests. "I gasp like a fish taken from the water. My chest strains for more and more air, but the air no longer nourishes me. My limbs weaken, my sight darkens, my head whirls, I faint and fall. I had rather die all at once than flop about fish-like until I strangle at last." The man was a slave who had come from the Shinanteka nation, far to the south. Those people were and still are prey to a curious illness which seems to run in certain of their family bloodlines. We and they called it the painted disease, and you Spaniards now call it the Chinanteka, the Pinto people, because an afflicted one's skin is blotched with livid blue. His body somehow gradually becomes unable to make use of the air it breathes, and so it dies of suffocation, exactly in the manner of a fish removed from its sustaining element. My father and I arrived at the lake shore, where two sturdy posts were embedded a little way apart. The surrounding night was lighted by urn fires and made smoky by burning incense. Through the haze danced the priests of Atlawa, old men, black all over, their robes black, their faces blackened, and their long hair matted with ochito, which is the black pine tar our fowlers smear on their legs, and lower body to shield them from the cold when they wade into the lake waters. Two of the priests tweedled the ritual music on flutes made from human shin bones, while another thumped a drum. That was a special sort of drum, specially suited to the occasion. A giant dried pumpkin, partly filled with water, so it floated half-submerged in the lake shallows. Beaten with thigh bones, the water drum gave out a resonant rataplan, which echoed from the mountains visible across the lake. The Xochimilco was led into the circle of smoky light. He was naked. He wore not even the basic machtlado, which customarily encircles a man's loins and private parts. Even in the flickery firelight, I could see that his body was not a flesh color mottled with blue, but a dead blue, touched only here and there with flesh color. He was spread-eagled between the lakeshore posts, one ankle and one wrist bound to each stake. A priest, waving an arrow as a song leader waves his stick, chanted an invocation. "This man's life fluid we give to you, Atlawa, mingled with the life water of our beloved Lake Chantacan. We give it to you, Etlawa, that you may in return deign to send your flocks of precious fowl to the nets of our fowlers, and so on. That continued long enough to bore me, if not Etlawa. Then, without any warning or ritual flourish, the priest suddenly lowered the arrow and jabbed it with all his strength upward, twisting it into the blue man's genital organs. The victim, however much he might have thought he desired that release from life, gave a scream. He howled a scream. He ululated a scream that overrode the sound of flutes, drum, and chanting. He screamed, but he did not scream for long. The priest, with the bloody arrow, drew a cross on the man's chest for a target, and all the priests pranced about him in a circle, each carrying a bow and many arrows. As each passed in front of the Xochimilco, he thrummed an arrow into the blue man's heaving breast. When the prancing was done and the arrows used up, the dead man looked like an overgrown specimen of the animal we called a prickly little boar. There was not much else to the ceremony. The body was unloosed from the stakes and tied by a rope behind a fowler's accolai pulled up on the sand. The fowler rowed his canoe out into the lake, out of our view, towing the corpse until it should sink of the water that seeped into its natural orifices and the arrow punctures. Thus Etlawa received his sacrifice. My father hoisted me to his shoulders again and started his long strides back across the island. As I bobbed along, high and safe and secure, I made a boyishly arrogant vow to myself. If ever it was my tenali to be selected for the flowery death of sacrifice, even to some alien god, I would not scream, whatever was done to me, whatever pain I suffered. Foolish child. I thought death meant only dying, and doing it badly or bravely. At that moment in my snug and unthreatened young life, being borne on strong shoulders homeward to a sweet sleep from which I would awaken to a new morning at the early bird's call, how could I know what death really is? As we believed in those days, a hero slain in the service of a mighty lord or sacrificed in homage to a high god was assured of a life everlasting in the most resplendent of afterworlds, where he would be rewarded and regaled with bliss throughout eternity. And now Christianity tells us that we all may hope for an afterlife and a similarly splendid heaven. But consider, even the most heroic of heroes dying in the most honorable cause, even the most devout Christian martyr dying in the certainty of reaching heaven, he will never again know the caress of this world's moonlight dappling his face as he walks beneath the world's rustling cypress trees. A trifling pleasure, so small, so simple, so ordinary, but never to be known again. Your Excellency evinces impatience. Forgive me, Senor Bishop, that my old wits sometimes drift off the straight road onto meandering bypaths. I know that some things I have told, and some other things of which I shall tell, you may not regard as a strictly historical account. But I pray your forbearance, for I do not know whether I shall ever have another opportunity to say these things, and, for all I say, I do not say all that could be said. Casting my mind again backward to my childhood, I cannot claim that it was in any way extraordinary for our place and time, since I was no more or less than an ordinary boy-child. The day number and year number of my birth were numbers regarded neither as fortunate nor misfortunate. I was not born during any portents in the sky, an eclipse budding at the moon, for example, which could similarly have bitten me with a hair-lip, or permanently shadowed my face with a dark birthmark. I had none of the physical features our people regarded as unhandsome defects in a male. Not curly hair, nor jug-handle ears, nor double chin, nor any cleft in it, no protruding rabbit teeth, my nose neither flat nor too beakishly pronounced, no averted navel, no conspicuous moles. Most fortunate for me, my black hair grew straight and smooth. There were no tufts turned up or turned awry. My boyhood comrade Chimali had one of those unruly feathers of hair, and all his young life he prudently, even fearfully, kept that tuft clipped short and plastered down with oxidol. I remember once, in our early years, when he had to wear a pumpkin over his head for a whole day. The scribes smile. I had better explain. The fowlers of Chantacan caught ducks and geese in the most practical way and in goodly numbers, by raising large nets on poles here and there in the lake's shallow red waters, then making some violent noise to startle the birds into flight, and seizing those that got entangled in the nets. But we boys of Chantacan had our own sly method. We would cut off the top of a pumpkin or other large calabash gourd, and hollow out its inside, and cut a hole in it through which to see and breathe. We would put the pumpkin over our head, then dog paddle out to where the ducks or geese sat placidly on the lake. Our bodies being invisible under water, the birds never seemed to find anything alarming in the slow approach of a floating gourd or two. We could get close enough to grab a bird's legs and yank it under the surface. It was not always easy. Even a small teal can put up quite a fight against a small boy. But generally, we could keep the bird under water until it drowned and went limp. The maneuvers seldom even disturbed the rest of the flock afloat nearby. Chimali and I spent a day at that sport, and we had a respectable heap of ducks stacked on shore by the time we tired and decided to quit. But then we discovered that all the swimming about had dissolved to Chimali's hair plaster, and his tuft was sticking up behind, like the back feather worn by certain of our warriors. We were at the end of the island, farthest from our village, meaning Chimali would have to cross the whole of Chantacan looking like that. "Ay, kill it," he muttered. The expression refers only to the malodorous passing of gut wind, but it was a vehement enough expletive, from a boy of 8 or 9 years, that it would have earned him a thrashing with thorns if an adult had been there to overhear it. "We can get back into the water," I suggested, "and swim around the island, if we stay far enough offshore." "Maybe you could," said Chimali. "I am so winded and waterlogged that I would sink on the instant. Suppose we wait until dark to walk back home." I said, "In the daylight you risk running into some priest who may notice your standing tuft of hair. In the dark you risk meeting some monster even more terrible, like night wind. But you decide, and I am with you." We sat and thought for a while, idly nipping at honey ants. Those were everywhere on the ground at that season, their abdomens bulging with nectar. We picked up the insects and bit their hinder ends for a sip of the sweet honey. But each droplet was minuscule, and no matter how many ants we nipped, we were getting hungry. "I know," Chimali said at last. "I will wear my pumpkin all the way home." And that is what he did. Of course he could not see too well through its eye-hole, so I had to lead him, and we were both considerably encumbered by our burdens of dead, wet, heavy ducks. This meant that Chimali quite often stumbled and fell, or walked into tree trunks, or toppled into roadside ditches. By good fortune, his pumpkin never broke to pieces. But I laughed at him all the way, and dogs barked at him, and, since the twilight came before we reached home, Chimali himself may have astonished and terrified any passerby who saw him in the dark. But it might otherwise have been no laughing matter. There was good reason for Chimali's being always aware and careful of his unruly hair. Any boy with such a tuft, you see, was especially preferred by the priests when they required a male youngster for sacrifice. Do not ask me why. No priest has ever told me why. But then, what priest has ever had to give us a credible reason for the unreasonable rules he makes us live by, or for the fear and guilt and shame we must endure when we sometimes circumvent them? I do not mean to give the impression that any of us, young or old, lived lives of constant apprehension. Except for a few arbitrary vagaries, like the priest's predilection for boys with disordered hair, our religion and the priests who interpreted it did not make too many or too onerous demands of us, nor did any other authorities. We owed obedience to our rulers and governors, of course, and we had certain obligations to the Papitlan nobles, and we heeded the advice of our Timontintin wise men. But I was born into the middle class of our society, the Machehuatlan, the fortunate, so called because we were equally free of the upper class's heavy responsibilities and of the lower class's liability to being basely used. In our time there were few laws, deliberately few, so that every man might hold them all in his head and in his heart, and have not the excuse of ignorance for flouting them. The laws were not written down, like yours, nor pasted up in public places, like yours, so that a man must be forever consulting the long lists of edicts, rules, and regulations, to measure his every least action against you shall and you shall not. By your standards, our few laws may seem to have been lax or whimsical, and the penalties for their infraction unduly harsh. But our laws worked for the good of all, and all, knowing the dire consequences, obeyed them. Those who did not, they disappeared. An example. According to the laws you brought from Spain, a thief is punished with death. So he was in our time. But, by your laws, a hungry man who steals a thing to eat is a thief. Not so in our time. One of our laws said that in any maize field planted alongside a public road, the 4 rows of stalks adjacent to that road were accessible to the passerby. Any hungry wayfarer could pluck as many ears of maize as his empty belly required. But a man who greedily sought to enrich himself and plundered that maize field to collect a sackful for hoarding or trading, if he was caught, he died. Thus that one law ensured 2 good things: that the thieving man was permanently cured of thievery, and that the hungering man did not die of hunger. Our lives were regulated less by laws than by long-standing customs and traditions. Most of those governed the behavior of adults, or of clans, or of entire communities. But even as a child not yet grown beyond the name of 7 Flower, I was made aware of the traditional insistence on a male's being brave, strong, gallant, hard-working, and honest, of a female's being modest, chaste, gentle, hard-working, and self-effacing. What time I did not spend at play with my toys, most of them miniature war weapons and replicas of the tools of my father's trade, and what time I did not spend at play with Chimali and Teatli and other boys about my own age, I spent in the company of my father, when he was not at work in the quarry. Though of course I called him Tete, as all children childishly called their fathers. His name was Tepatzalan, meaning valley, after the low place among the mainland mountains where he had been born. Since he towered well above the average height of our men, that name, given him at the age of 7, was rather ridiculous in his adulthood. All our neighbors and his fellow quarriers called him by tall nicknames, Handful of Stars and Head Nodder and the like. Indeed, he had the nodder's head far down to my level, to speak the traditional father-to-son homilies. If perhaps he caught me impudently imitating the shuffle gait of our village's hunchbacked old garbage collector, my father would tell me sternly, "Take care that you do not mock the old, the ill, the maimed, or anyone who has fallen into some folly or transgression. Do not insult or despise them, but abase yourself before the gods, and tremble lest they bring the same misery upon you." Or if I showed little interest in what he tried to teach me of his trade, and any Makwahado boy who did not aspire to soldiering was expected to follow in his father's footsteps, he would lean down and say earnestly, "Flee not any labor to which the gods assign you, my son, but be content. I pray that they may grant you merits and good fortune, but whatever they give you, take it gratefully. If it be only a small gift, do not scorn it, for the gods can take even that little away. If it be a large bestowal, perhaps some great talent, Do not be proud or vainglorious, but remember that the gods must have denied that tenality to someone else that you might have it. Sometimes, at no discernible instigation, and with his big face reddening slightly, my father would deliver a small sermon that made no sense to me at all. Something on this order: live cleanly, and be not dissolute, or you will anger the gods, and they will cover you with infamy. Restrain yourself, my son, until you meet the girl whom the gods destine for your wife, because the gods know how to arrange all things properly. Above all, never disport yourself with another man's wife. It seemed an unnecessary injunction, for I did live cleanly. Like every other mexicano, except the priests, I bathed twice a day in hot, soapy water, and swam often in the lake, and periodically sweated out my remaining bad vapors in our oven-like little steam house. I cleaned my teeth, night and morning, with a mixture of bees' honey and white ashes. As for disporting myself, I knew of no man on the island who had a wife my age, and none of us boys included girls in our games anyway. All those father-to-son preachments were so many rote recitations, handed down through the generations, word for word, like the midwife's discourse at my birth. Only on those occasions did my father Tepetzalan talk at great length. He was otherwise a taciturn man. In the noise of the quarry, there was little use for talk, and at home my mother's incessant, fretful chatter gave him little chance to put in a word. Tete did not mind. He always preferred action to speech, and he taught me far more by example than with the parroted harangues. If my father was at all defective in the qualities expected of our men, strength, bravery, and all that, it consisted only in his letting himself be bullied and browbeaten by my tene. My mother was the most untypical female among all those of our class on Xaltacan, the least modest, least docile, least self-effacing. She was a shrill termagant, the tyrant of our little family, and the bane of all our neighbors. But she preened herself on being the model of womanly perfection, so it followed that she lived in a state of perpetual and angry dissatisfaction with everything around her. If I learned anything at all useful from my tene, it was to be sometimes dissatisfied with myself. I remember being corporally punished by my father on only one occasion, when I richly deserved it. We boys were allowed, even encouraged, to kill birds like crows and grackles which pecked at our garden crops, and that we did with reed blowpipes which propelled shaped clay pellets. But one day, out of some impish perversity, I blew a pellet at the little tame quail we kept in our house. Most houses had one of those pets, to keep down scorpions and other insect vermin. Then, to compound my crime, I tried to blame the bird's killing on my friend, Tlotli. It took my father not long to find out the truth. While my murder of the unoffending quail might have been only moderately penalized, the strictly prohibited sin of lying could not. My tete had to inflict on me the prescribed punishment for speaking spittle and phlegm, as we call a lie. He winced himself, and he did it, piercing my lower lip with a maguey thorn and leaving it there until bedtime. The pain, the mortification, the pain, the tears of remorse, the pain. The punishment left such a lasting impression on me that I have, in turn, left its impress upon the archives of our land. If you have seen our picture writing, then you have seen figures of persons or other creatures with a small, curly, scroll-like symbol emanating from them. That symbol represents a nahuatl, which is to say a tongue or language or speech or sound. It indicates that the figure is talking or making a noise of some sort. If the nahuatl is more than ordinarily curly and elaborated by the symbol for a butterfly or flower, then the figure is speaking poetry or singing music. When I myself became a scribe, I added another elaboration to our picture writing. the Nahuatl pierced by a maguey thorn, and all our other scribes soon adopted it. When you see that symbol before a figure, you know you see a picture of someone telling a lie. The punishments more frequently dealt out by my mother were inflicted with no hesitation, no compunction, no compassion. I suspect, even with some pleasure at giving pain besides correction. They may have left no legacy to this land's pictured history, like the ton and thorn symbol, but they certainly affected the life history of myself and my sister. I remember one night watching my mother ferociously beat my sister's buttocks bright red with a bundle of nettles, because the girl had been guilty of immodesty. And I should explain that immodesty did not necessarily mean to us what it evidently means to you white men, an indecent exposure of one's unclothed body. In the matter of clothing, we children of both sexes were totally naked, weather permitting, until we were 4 or 5 years old. Then we covered our nudity with a long rectangle of rough cloth, which tied at one shoulder and draped around us to mid-thigh. At the attainment of adulthood, that is, at the age of 13, we boys began wearing machtlatl loincloth under our outer mantle, which was now of finer cloth. At about the same age, depending upon when they had their first bleeding, girls donned the womanly skirt and blouse, plus an undergarment rather like what you call a diaper. Pardon my recital of minor details, but I am trying to fix the time of that beating of my sister. 9 Reed had become Tsitsitlini some while before. The name means the sound of small bells ringing, so she was past the age of 7. However, I saw her nether parts beaten nearly raw, meaning that she was wearing no undergarment, so she was not yet 13. All things considered, I reckon her age to have been 10 or 11. And what she had done to deserve that beating, the only thing of which she was guilty, was that she had murmured dreamily, "I hear drums and music playing. I wonder where they are dancing tonight." To our mother, that was a modesty. Tsitsi was yearning for frivolity when she should have been applying herself to a loom or something else as tedious. You know the chili, that vegetable pod which is used in our cookery? Though the degree of piquancy varies, all the different types of chili are so hot to the tongue, so pungent, so biting, that it is no accident that their name comes from our word for sharp or pointed. Like every cook, my mother used the chilies in the usual ways, but she had another use for them, which I almost hesitate to mention, since her inquisitors already have instruments enough. One day, when I was 4 or 5 years old, I sat with Tlotli and Shimali in our dooryard, playing the Patoli bean game. This was not the grown man's gambling game, also called Patoli, which on occasion has cost a family its fortune, or caused a mortal family feud. No, we 3 boys had merely drawn a circle in the dust, and had each put a jumping bean in its center, the object being to see whose bean, warmed to activity by the sun, would be the first to hop outside the circle. My own bean tended to sluggishness, and I muttered some imprecation at it. Maybe I said Bukoya, or something of the sort. Suddenly I was upside down and off the ground. My tene had snatched me up by the ankles. I saw the inverted faces of Chimali and Tlotli, their mouths and eyes wide with surprise, before I was whisked into the house and to the cooking hearth. My mother shifted her grip so that one of her hands was free, and with it she flung into the fire a number of dried red chilies. When they were crackling and sending up a dense yellow smoke, my tene took me up again by the ankles and suspended my head down in those acrid fumes. I leave the next little while to your imagination, but I think I nearly perished. I know that for half a month afterward my eyes watered continuously so that I could scarcely see, and I could not draw breath without feeling as if I were inhaling flames and flints. Yet I must count myself fortunate, for our customs did not dictate that a boy spend much time in his mother's company, and I now had every excuse not to. Thereafter I avoided her, as my tough-haired friend Jamali avoided the island priests. Even when she came looking for me to command some chore or errand, I could always retire to the safety of the hill of the lime-burning kilns. The quarriers believed that no woman should ever be allowed near the kilns, or the quality of the lime would be spoiled, and not even my mother dared to trespass on that hill. But poor Tsitsitlini knew no such refuge. In accordance with custom and her tenali, a girl had to learn womanly and wifely labors, cooking, spinning, weaving, sewing, embroidering. So my sister had to spend most of every day under our mother's sharp eye and limber tongue. Her tongue neglected no opportunity to deliver one of the traditional mother-to-daughter orations. Some of those, which Tsitsi repeated to me, we agreed had been fashioned by whatever long-ago ancestor, more for the benefit of the mother than the daughter. Attend always, girl, to the service of the gods and the giving of comfort to your parents. If your mother calls, do not loiter to be called twice, but come instantly. When commanded to a task, speak no insolent answer, and show no reluctance to comply. Indeed, if your tene calls another, and that other does not come quickly, come yourself to see what is wanted, and do it yourself, and do it well. Other preachments were the expectable admonitions to modesty, virtue, and chastity, and not even Tsitsi or I could find fault with them. We knew that after she turned 13, until she was perhaps 22 and properly married, no man could so much as speak to her in public, nor she to him. If, in a public place, you meet with a likely youth, take no notice, give no sign, lest that inflame his passions. Guard against improper familiarities with men. Yield not to the baser impulses of your heart, or lust will befoul your character as mud does water. Tsitsitlini would probably never have disobeyed that one sensible prohibition, but by the time she was 12 years old, surely she felt some sexual sensations stirring in her, and some curiosity about sex. It may have been to conceal what she considered unmaidenly and inexpressible feelings that she tried to vent them privately and alone and in secret. All I know is that one day our mother came home unexpectedly from a trip to the market, and caught my sister lying on her pallet, nude from the waist down, doing an act of which I did not understand the significance for some time. She was caught playing with her tapili parts, and using a small wooden spindle for the purpose. You mutter under your breath, Your Excellency, and you gather the skirts of your cassock almost protectedly about you. Have I somehow offended by telling frankly what occurred? I have been careful to use the coarser words for the telling, and I must assume, since the coarser words abound in both our languages, that the acts they describe are not uncommon among either of our peoples. To punish Tsitsitlini's offense against her own body, Artene seized her and seized the container of chili powder, and viciously rubbed the burning chili into those exposed, tender tipoli parts. Though she muffled her daughter's screams with the bed covers, I heard and came running, and I gasped, "Should I go to fetch the physician?" "No, no, doctor," our mother snapped at me. "What your sister has done is too shameful to be known outside these walls." Tsitsi stifled her sobs and added her plea. "I am not much hurt, little brother. Summon no doctor. Mention this to no one, not even Tete. Try to pretend that even you know nothing of it. I beg you." I might have ignored my tyrant mother, but not my beloved sister. Though I did not then know the reason for her refusal of assistance, I respected it, and I went away from there, to worry and wonder by myself. Would that I had disregarded them both and done something. I think, from what came later, that the cruelty inflicted by our mother on that occasion, intended to discourage Tsitsi's awakening sexual urges, had exactly the contrary effect. I think, from that time on, my sister's tipoli parts burned like a chilly blistered throat, hot and thirsty, clamoring to be slaked. I think it would not have been many years before dear Tsitsitlini would have gone astraddle the road, as we say of a depraved and promiscuous woman. That was the most sordid and squalid depth to which a decent Mechikadal maiden could sink. Or so I thought, until I learned of the even worse fate that eventually did befall my sister. How she later behaved, what she became, and what she came to be called, I will tell in its place. But I want to say here only one thing. I want to say that to me, she was, and always will be, Tsitsitlini, the sound of small bells ringing.